Tonight's tale is called Do Not Use Time Travel to Prevent Someone's Death. Trust me. In the year 2030, it will be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that magic is real. I know because that's where I'm from. The study of magic is still in its infancy, and the public knowledge of it is scarce. If you look online or watch the news, at best you'll see levitation and maybe short-distance teleportation. For the really good stuff, you have to look on the black market, which it should go without saying, can be quite perilous. I should have been skeptical when the prospect of actual time travel fell into my lap, but I was desperate and vulnerable. I'm sure she saw that in me, and I'm sure that's why she offered it in the first place. The only thing I'm not sure of is what she got out of it. Simon? The girl asked. Yep, I replied. Without saying a word, she turned and waved for me to follow. I figured she must be Melody, the girl my friend told me about, although she was definitely not what I pictured a fortune teller looking like. For one, she seemed young, probably late 20s, like me. Her tattooed arms drew attention to her pale white skin, and before she turned, I noticed a piercing on her lip and another above her left eye. It was also hard to ignore her dark, purple hair. Expecting an old lady in a turban, she looked back at me and winked. I felt myself turn red. You can tell what I'm thinking? I asked. She laughed and replied, No, but men aren't exactly hard to read. That was true even before telepathy was a thing. I followed her down a makeshift hallway. It was pretty impressive what they were able to do with a loft apartment in Queens. The curtains and flex walls created hallways, waiting rooms, and private areas. It almost made the place feel like a hospital. Though the dim lighting guaranteed no one would mistake it for one. Wait in here, she said as she parted one of the black curtains. I stepped into the room. It was small, barely bigger than a walk-in closet, and contained 2 chairs facing each other. I sat in the one closest to me. At the time, I wasn't sure why I'd bothered coming. I was sent by a close friend of mine, who a few years earlier I would go to for anything computer or technology related. For lack of a better word, he was my hacker friend. It was that community which most embraced and experimented with magic. In place of pirated movies and music, they began to trade spells and curses. This friend told me I absolutely had to have my fortune told by Melody. My thoughts were interrupted by heavy breathing from just behind the curtain where I had been let in earlier. The curtain began to move, as though someone were struggling to find their way through. Eventually, the pale white hand and the tattooed arm it was connected to showed themselves. Melody was making her way back in, but seemed to be struggling. Melody? I asked. Her only response was a strange, guttural sound. Are you okay? I tried again. When the curtain finally parted, I was greeted by a grotesque visage barely resembling the Melody I had seen minutes earlier. Her head was bloated to about twice the size it should have been, while her facial features seemed to have been haphazardly rearranged. Although one arm seemed perfectly fine, the other was crooked and twisted unnaturally. One leg was similarly damaged as she limped towards me. She struggled to part her lips and speak. What I heard was a high-pitched, squealing mockery of a human voice.
Before telepathy was a thing.
I stumbled backwards into the wall behind me while pushing a chair forward to block her path. Melody swung her bad arm in a pathetic attempt to move the chair, then spoke again.
Lady in a cabin.
This time, when she opened her mouth, it didn't close. Instead, it continued to open wider and wider, compressing her eyes and nose unnaturally into one side of her face. In place of words, she began to let out a horrific wailing. Her sound was cut off suddenly by a loud snap, the hinges of her jaw finally giving out. Blood began to pour from her eye sockets, and small cracks appeared over every exposed part of her body. With a loud thud, she fell to the ground and rapidly decomposed into a mess of white, black, and red biomatter. I put a hand over my mouth in a feeble attempt to stop the sudden urge to vomit. I was unsuccessful, though considering the mess on the floor, it would be hard for anyone to tell that I contributed to it. The curtain parted again. This time, the true Melody showed herself. Earlier, I would have described her as pretty. In contrast to what I had just witnessed, she was a beauty beyond compare. She looked at the mess and yelled, "Motherfucker, she got in here?" Then she looked at me, and with an attempt at sympathy said, "Here, come with me. I'll take you to a clean room." In retrospect, I should have politely asked, "What the fuck was that?" Instead, in my rattled state, I followed her wordlessly, making sure to step over the decomposing Melody. Once in the hallway, she turned to me and apologized. "Seriously, I'm sorry about that. It's just some experimental magic we're practicing. That wasn't supposed to happen." She stopped mid-sentence and turned to a man standing at the end of the hall with a startled look on his face. She yelled in his direction, "What the fuck happened, Brian?" Brian was one of her colleagues, I suppose. He stuttered a nervous reply. Sorry, Mitch was supposed to recast the prism spell earlier. I guess he forgot." Melody responded, "Just get this shit cleaned up and tell Mitch to wait for me in my office." Then she gestured for me to follow her. I didn't speak again until we were in another room, nearly identical to the first one. Once my nerves had calmed, I noticed a satchel hanging over her left shoulder. As she rummaged through the bag, she spoke again. "There aren't enough people good at this yet, so I'm forced to work with idiots most of the time. Lucky for you," she smiled brightly, "you're here to see me, not them." "Sure," I said quietly. She retrieved 2 cups from the bag and held them out towards me. She held up one of them and said, "Spit in this one," and then held up the other, "Piss in this one," up to the red lines. "Seriously?" I asked. As she handed the cups to me, she added with a subtle laugh, "There are a couple of other substances that work too, but people usually find these the most comfortable." I began to ask, "Is there a..." Before I could finish my sentence, she interrupted. "Bathroom? Nope, gonna be out of order for a bit. I'll leave the room, just poke your head out when you're done." I sat in the small, nearly empty room with 2 cups in my hand and wondered what the hell I was doing. You're probably wondering the same thing. Why didn't I just leave? I don't have a great answer. I mentioned already that I was desperate. It's possible I just wanted to experience anything outside my normal routine, no matter how bizarre or horrifying. I filled the cups and handed them to Melody waiting outside. She walked off and assured me she'd be back in a few minutes. I'm not sure I want to know what she did with the contents of those cups. I waited and closely watched the curtain, ready at any moment for another grotesque Melody to stumble into the room. Thankfully, I was undisturbed until she returned. Melody unceremoniously let herself into the room and took a seat next to me. She scooted her chair forward so she was close and looking me directly in the eyes. She had a more serious tone than before, which I guessed meant she was ready to tell my fortune. She spoke without empathy, as though she were simply sharing cold, clinical facts. I'm going to tell you a couple of things you already know, and a couple of things you don't. You're fucked up. Your therapist is mostly right. You've never gotten past your friend's death, and that guilt is the source of virtually all your problems. Where he's wrong is when he says you can get better. She continued. June 3rd next year. After a couple glasses of whiskey, you'll put your father's Smith & Wesson in your mouth again, but this time you'll have the courage to pull the trigger. Once she heard the sob escape my lips and noticed the tears on my cheeks, she remembered to be human. She took on a more somber, sympathetic tone as she went on. Sorry to tell you all this, but it's why people come here. Now, because you know your future, it'll likely change, and June 3rd is no longer accurate. It could happen sooner. I forced my words past the lump in my throat to ask, why would anyone want to know this? She put a hand on my knee and answered, most people wouldn't, but I wanted you to have all the facts before I make my offer. At the time, I really believed she meant well for me as I asked, what offer? She smiled and explained, what I said was true. In this world, the way it is, you can't get better. Tim's death permanently broke something in you. The one shot you have at correcting yourself is correcting the world, and I think we can help you do that. In that moment, I had no idea what the hell she was talking about, but I'm pretty sure I would have agreed to anything. I looked at her and asked, how? She leaned in further as she spoke. It's something we call soul displacement. The human soul is something that exists, but it isn't subject to the same laws as our physical bodies. Under the right conditions, a soul can be moved from one place to another, and more importantly for you, under very special conditions, it can be moved from one time to another. Time travel? I asked. She finally cut to the chase. To put it bluntly, yeah, motherfucking time travel. It's hard to pull off. It's extremely risky, but if it works, I can save Tim. I finished her sentence. She smiled again. No, if this works, you can make sure he doesn't need saving to begin with. We'll send you back to the day it happened, and all you have to do is avoid the mistake you made that night. Don't drink before you get behind the wheel, or better yet, this time, when Tim suggests hanging out at his place instead of going out, listen to him. My heart was racing, and I had to catch my breath before speaking again. Is it really possible? How would it work? Melody stood up and spoke faster, more excitedly. You'd wake up in your own body 10 years ago. Everything will be exactly as it was then, except you'd have all the knowledge and memories you have now. After I save Tim, or stop it from happening at all, do I come back here? I asked. She answered quickly. No, we can send you back, but once you're there, you're there. That's actually a good thing, though. This is your chance to fix the last 10 years and live a better version of them. You wouldn't want to skip that, would you? I shook my head and responded, definitely not. So you'll do it? She asked. I should have been weary of how much she wanted it. What did she have to gain? All I could think, though, was, what do I have to lose? A thought she clearly intended to implant before making the offer, even if everything she said was true. I smiled my first genuine smile in years and answered, yes, I'll do it. I don't recall exactly what she said. I think I was so shocked by it I sort of blocked it out. "Can't you knock me out or something first?" I asked. "Sorry, no, you have to be fully aware. To minimize risk and ensure your soul is cleanly severed from your current body, you have to experience death with full lucidity," Melody answered. I shook my head. "Christ, fuck, I don't know if I can." She put a hand on my arm. "It's worth it, and it's only temporary. Moments after it happens, you'll wake up in your bed back home. It'll be senior year of high school, you'll have your whole life ahead of you, and this time, you'll do it right. After 10 years, all you have to do is not come back here, and your death will also be undone. You get to go on living your best life." I closed my eyes to muster the courage I needed, and once again reaffirmed my resolve. Okay, fuck, do it." I'll spare you the gory details. All I'll say is that Melody was good with a knife, and it didn't hurt as bad as I expected it to. Though I was scared as hell while I laid on the table bleeding to death, staring up at a smiling Melody. It almost made me hopeful that I was scared. If I was afraid to lose my life, it meant that some part of me wanted to hold on to it. Maybe it was because I finally had hope that something could actually make it better. As my world went dark, I heard Melody laugh and whisper, "Goodbye, Simon." For years, I've thought of the past as an oasis that I was locked away from. If only I could open that door, if only I could go back, then I could escape the waking nightmare my life had become. However, the truth is that traveling back in time didn't feel like opening a door to an oasis. It felt more like exhuming a corpse and taking its place. As promised, I was in my old bedroom in my old home. I was disoriented at first, so it took a moment for me to realize I was sobbing violently. I don't exactly know why, but I suspect it was a side effect of having died moments earlier. The next sensation was pain. It felt as though I'd dipped my hands in fire up to my wrists where Melody had cut me. Finally, there was the sinking feeling that I did not belong, like I was trespassing. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tim. "I'll be there in 10. That's right, it was his turn to drive that day. That's why we decided that I would be the one to drive that night. While the phone was in my hand, I took a quick glance at the calendar and confirmed it was May 31st, 2019. I then looked at the time, 6 a.m., about 17 hours before Tim died. I sent a message back to Tim. "Great, I'll be ready." While using my phone, I sensed someone watching me. I quickly turned around but saw no one. I told myself it was just paranoia and a side effect of the absolutely insane situation I was in. The sensation that I was being watched, however, did not go away. I quickly got dressed for school. Focusing on Tim made me feel better, and I knew that when I saw him, that feeling of home would come back to me. I ignored the burning in my wrists and the feeling of being watched. I focused solely on the task at hand: save Tim. I barely held it together when I saw him in the car, alive. It's hard to describe the feeling. I might be the first person in history to have felt it, a chance to reverse the irreversible. As I opened the door and heard his voice for the first time in a decade, I actually did feel at home. Good morning, my friend, Tim said as he smiled. He was always the more positive one. I quietly replied, Hey. Bro, cheer up. It's fucking Friday, and as if the day couldn't get any better, my friend, we are playing badminton in gym today. He was amazing. Only Tim could cheer up a man who had just ripped a hole in the fabric of time itself. I smiled. I actually smiled. Tim glanced over and, seeing my smile, exclaimed, There he is! In his excitement, Tim lost focus on the road for a moment, and I yelled, Stop sign! The seatbelt was tight across my chest as the car came to a sudden stop. Noticing the car in front of us crossing the intersection, it occurred to me that we may have been hit if I didn't stop Tim. My heart sank. Was the universe onto me? Was our near miss a coincidence? Or was the world conspiring to murder Tim in place of his scheduled death that night? Damn, sorry man, Tim apologized. I probably got a little too emotional as I replied, You've got to be fucking careful, man. Tim saw the tear on my cheek and reassured me. Jesus, man, it's okay. We're fine. We drove the rest of the way to school in silence. It was so strange being in school again. On the one hand, it was the fulfillment of a nostalgic wish that burned inside me for 10 years. On the other, I was so preoccupied with paranoia every moment I was away from Tim. Our only class together that semester was gym, so I wouldn't see him again until the second to last period of the day. A part of me thought I'd already seen him for the last time. I worried some freak accident would kill my friend before I could save him. I kept picturing him tripping and hitting his head the wrong way or landing on something sharp. Until gym class, I passed through the day in a daze. In moments, it felt like a dream, and in others, a nightmare. The only exception was during my lunch period. That's when I saw Isabel Thompson and suddenly felt lucid again. I hadn't thought of Isabel in a long time, and if not for my best friend's untimely death, she would have been my biggest regret from that age. She was the girl I had a crush on. The girl who I didn't know also had a crush on me, until it was too late. I might have thought I was dreaming, or maybe I was desperately seeking a distraction from the constant paranoia. Whatever drove me to it, I sat down next to her. I greeted her. Hey, Isabel, I said. My voice held the weight of years past. I think she heard it as her brow furrowed with concern. Hi, Simon. Everything okay? She asked. I lied. Yeah, it's always a good day when we're playing badminton. Stealing Tim's joke was a good idea. Isabel laughed and replied, It's also Friday. That helps too. Just like that, I was home again as I replied, True, that definitely helps. Speaking of which, what are you up to tonight? Isabel smiled. Same thing everyone's up to, Cody's party. Then she looked at me excitedly and added, Are you coming? Shit. Cody's party. The party where I was too nervous to talk to Isabel. The party where I tried to ease those nerves with a few beers too many. The first time I had this conversation with Isabel 10 years ago, I lied and pretended to know about Cody's party. Then, the rest of the day, I frantically asked around until I managed to learn the details. The only thing left after that was convincing Tim to come with me as wingman. I disappointed Isabel and answered, Nah, I don't think so. Why not? She asked. Because I don't want to fucking kill my best friend, Isabel. I was probably right not to go with that answer. Instead, I lied again. Have some family stuff tonight. It sucks though. Wish I could go. Oh, well, maybe you can show up late, she said hopefully. Then it happened. She touched my arm and added, I was really hoping to see you there. The next incident worth mentioning was during my European history class in the period before gym. I think everyone had at least one class in high school which was impossible to stay awake through. For some reason, no matter how much coffee I drank, in a battle against European history, coffee always lost. It was only 5 minutes into the period when I dozed off. In my half-awake, half-unconscious state, the feeling of being watched reached its peak. Suddenly, from my peripheral vision, there emerged many small, green figures. I heard mischievous laughter and a jumble of almost words that didn't quite make sense. The gibberish slowly coalesced into something I could understand.
Simon.
Then I was jolted awake as one of them let out an ear-piercing,
You don't belong here.
I must have reacted violently when I awoke because I managed to get Mr. Nelson's attention. "May I continue, Simon?" he asked. I mumbled an apology. In gym class, I saw Tim and felt at home one last time. I played badminton and laughed like an idiot. I had fun though. I genuinely had fun as I hit the shuttlecock over the net. I had fun when Tim and I high-fived after our third win in a row. I had fun when Tim and I laughed like fools at the word shuttlecock. This was what I missed so dearly. I'd love to say the whole journey was worth it for these brief moments of joy and to spend another day with Tim, but that would be another lie. On the drive to Tim's house, he looked at me with a grin and said, "I'm surprised you haven't mentioned Cody's party yet." My paranoia made it hard to participate in the conversation. I was so sure that at any moment a truck would hit Tim's side of the car and I would have to watch him die again. As I hesitated, Tim added, "Come on, I know you must have heard about Cody's party, and I fucking know for sure you heard Isabel's gonna be there." I faked a laugh and said, "I might have heard a thing or two." I quickly added, "Honestly, you know that's not my scene though. Don't really want to hang out with a bunch of drunk idiots." Tim laughed and asked, "Even if Isabel's one of those drunk idiots?" "Even then," I said. Tim held up a hand defensively and said, "Okay, just know that I am fully willing to be your wingman tonight." Did Tim want to go to the party? Is that what happened the first time? I suddenly couldn't remember, but something definitely didn't feel right. When I didn't reply, Tim awkwardly continued, "You can just strap me to your back and I will wingman you into a world of sexual delight." My silence continued, so Tim tried again. "Come on, man, that's funny. You get it, right? Wings on your back so you can fly to Isabel and make love, sexual delight." I forced a laugh. Tim sighed in relief and said, "Finally, I was starting to feel pretty stupid there." When we parked in Tim's driveway, it was my turn to sigh in relief. We made it in one piece. As we left the car, I glanced at my phone and saw it was 3:30 p.m. That meant about 7.5 hours until Tim was supposed to die. Every Friday, we would invariably end up hanging out at either my house or Tim's. Some of my best memories were those Friday nights playing video games, eating pizza, and watching movies. That particular Friday, I did my best to fake it through the festivities, but Tim could tell something was off. "Seriously, man, I've never seen you this bad. What is going on?" Tim asked. It was 8 p.m., 3 hours to go. I faked a smile and answered, "Really, it's nothing. I just couldn't sleep last night, so I'm exhausted." Nothing got past Tim. He immediately replied, "Bullshit. You literally told me last week that 'I'm tired' is the excuse you always use when you're actually depressed about something. So what is it? Are you thinking about Isabel?" I almost latched onto that as a lie, but I realized if I blamed Isabel, Tim would take that as code for "I want to go to Cody's party." So instead, I said, "Fair, but also sometimes I'm actually just tired." Tim shook his head and relented. "Okay, fine." There was a reason Tim was my best friend. He never gave up. When you were upset, his sole mission was to make you feel better. That Friday night, even though he couldn't possibly know what was wrong, he tried to cheer me up. So he put on one of my favorite comedies, Swingers. I forced myself to laugh when I knew I was supposed to, just so Tim wouldn't be concerned. In reality, I was watching him more than I was watching the movie. At any moment, I expected, I'm not sure what. I expected him to vanish, maybe. It was near the end of the movie when the clock struck 11 p.m. without incident. At that moment, I was awash in a flood of relief, joy, and hope. I was free from the paranoia and free to try life one more time. I would do it right this time, though. I started making plans for the next decade of my life. I wasn't going to drop out of college this time. I wasn't going to waste my years in dead-end jobs. I would embrace life to its fullest. Is this what life was supposed to feel like? Is this the hope that drives most people? On the screen, Vince Vaughn was making funny faces at a woman in a diner. Tim was laughing, and so was I. But this time, it was a genuine laugh. Then, Tim's laughter suddenly took on a guttural quality and began sounding more like a cough. My heart sank. I ran to Tim and asked, "Are you okay?" Tim looked at me. His eyes were wide with fear, as though he suddenly understood what was happening. Then he looked down and began coughing violently. When he started dry heaving, I lost it. "No, God damn it, Tim!" I quickly took out my phone to dial 911. I was interrupted by Tim vomiting black sludge onto the coffee table and onto my shoes. I put a hand on Tim's back and yelled, "Tim, are you okay?" I suddenly noticed how pale his skin turned. It was almost completely white. He looked at me again. His irises were unnaturally wide, so there was almost no white in his eyes at all, and there was no longer fear there. I saw something else, though. Was it malice? He smiled as some of the black goo dribbled down his chin. Then he spoke in a flat voice. "Yeah, friend, I'm fine." The words came out of Tim's mouth, and I can't say it wasn't his voice, but I knew it wasn't Tim. The pale stranger stood up and stretched. He opened his mouth wide and then closed it. He repeated that action several times, as though testing that it worked. He looked at me again and said, "Thanks, friend. I'll see you around." I was completely broken in that moment. There wasn't a thought in my head. I couldn't say or do anything, as I simply watched the stranger walk out of the room. I heard the front door open and close as he left me there. Then I heard Tim's car start and drive off. I'm sorry, Isabel. I'm sorry, Cody. I'm sorry to everyone that got hurt at the party. I should have stopped him. I knew it wasn't Tim that left the house. Why didn't I stop him? Why did Melody send me back to this fucking place? She knew this would happen. It's been 2 days since Tim became whatever he is now. I haven't seen him since then, but he's been texting and calling. His messages all amount to some version of, "Miss you, friend?" "Where are you, friend?" Or, "Let's meet up, friend. I have lots to tell you." I don't know what will get me first, the new Tim or the little green people from that nightmare in European history class. I can feel them watching me, and sometimes I swear I see them in my peripheral vision. I haven't figured out my next move yet. Honestly, I'm considering meeting Tim. I know it probably wouldn't end well, but that might not be a bad thing. At this point, I just want it to end. I want to go home.